Good. Well, you know what it's like. We got to get acquainted first, but by that time the time's over. But so I've just got to jump into this thing. How many of you are 17 years or above? You can vote this. Okay. So how many of you are Democrats? How many of you are Republicans? All right. How many of you are ready to find out which one you are? Good, because that's what we're going to talk about. Freedom, capacity to do what you want to do, live where you want to live, say the things you want to say, travel, all those kinds of things. Let me give you an example. Under communism, which is socialism, which is government control, we were having dinner in Moscow under communism. And in communist countries and very, very socialist countries, when you go to visit, they give you a minder, a babysitter that travels with you to make sure you don't say or do something wrong and find out everything you know. And so you develop a relationship after a time. And so as we were sitting there on the final dinner before we came back to America, one of the folks asked, he said, "Do you have a passport?" And I said, "Naturally." He said, "Can we see it?" So I showed him the passport, and I showed the passport, and they would pass it around this table. Then they said, "Do you have an American Express card?" I said, "Yes." "Can we see that?" So I showed them the American Express card. And they passed it around, and everybody just looked at it and held it and things and gave it back. And they said, at the end, he handed them both to me. He said, "You don't understand what these are, do you?" I said, "Well, maybe I don't." He said, "With this," he held up the American passport. He said, "With this, you can go any place you want to go." He says, "We can't do that in the Soviet Union. We can't even travel without permission as to go from one province to another. Under socialism, the government tells you where you can go and where you can't. You can go any place in the world." He said, "And with this," he shows the American Express card, "you can buy anything that you want." Now, when government controls things, then they only make the things that you want you to make and buy the things that they want you to buy. So have you ever heard of a Yugo? Anybody ever heard of a Yugo? Yugo is an absolute worst car in the history of mankind. It was made by the Yugoslavians, and in order to buy a Yugo, you had to make sure that nobody else produced any cars that you had an option, because you'd never buy that thing on purpose. And so under communism, under socialism, they control what you can buy, and so they had these rickety cars. Once freedom came in, and they could choose what they wanted to, Yugo was gone like that, and they chose a BMW or a Chevrolet or something else. Now, I'm talking about that because I'm going to say that freedom creates abundance, makes us wealthy. But freedom is a three-legged stool. Freedom has three parts. Economic freedom, that's money. And so the little 5-year-old gets mad at his mother and says, "I'm tired of this place. I'm grabbing my teddy bear. I'm out of here." And he storms out of the house. The mother hides behind the curtain and watches him. He's not going anyplace because he has no economic freedom. He's as tied to that house as if he had a tether. Now, had he said, "Oh, by the way, I stole $500 out of your purse and I have your credit card, I'm leaving," that'd be a whole different ballgame. So in order to be free, you have to have economic freedom. But let us suppose that you're a multimillionaire and you're in jail. You have to have political freedom as well. So to be free, you have to have economic freedom. You have to have political freedom, and that's what we're going to talk about next. But then in order to be politically free, you have to be spiritually free. A person who wakes up in the middle of the night frustrated and concerned and frightened and scared and doesn't have peace in his heart, you cannot be completely free if you don't know Christ. So there is a tie between all three, and our founders understood it. I had a clicker when I came up here. It could not have gone too far, so I just try enough pockets and I'll find it. And so that's when it says that, let's just talk about this for a quick second about economics, about freedom making wealth. If half of all the people on earth live on less than $2 a day, half of those, for those that took algebra, that'd be a fourth. Half of those live on less than $1 a day. There are more people in China that live on less than $1 a day than exist in all of North America. The second richest spot on earth is Western Europe, France and Germany and Britain. In America, We have a level below which we will not permit a person to sink. You come to this country, you can complain about the country, sit down on the park bench, put your feet up. We will bury you with stamps for food, a roof over your head, a bed to sleep in, unlimited health care for you and anybody you've ever met, education, a person living in poverty in America. This isn't my idea. This is done by Robert Rector, who's dedicated his life to it. He does it for the Heritage Foundation and the Wall Street Journal every 24 months. The Rector study says that a person living in poverty in America is more likely to have a telephone, a television, an air conditioner, an automobile. There are more automobiles in America than there are registered drivers. Automobile eats more meat. More meat is a definition of wealth. That is protein. You look, if you don't have anything else other than information, look at the amount of protein people eat, and you'll see the wealthier the nation. The poorer the nation, the more vegetables they have to eat. And eats more meat, has more square footage space, has more space. A person living in poverty in America eats more meat, has more square footage space than in the second richest spot on earth, Western Europe. The question would be, why is that? The sixth largest nation on earth, 200 million people. Anybody know what GDP is? Or GDP? The gross domestic product. That's all the goods and services produced by an area, a city or state or a nation. The GDP of the sixth largest nation on earth is smaller than the state of Arkansas. Now, how'd you like to take the wealth in Arkansas and divide it among 200 million people? That's what happens. Well, Louisiana would be next. Louisiana is about 6 million people. The fourth largest nation on earth, 300 million people. Indonesia, member OPEC, produces oil. That's where the president grew up. The GDP of OPEC, of Indonesia, the GDP of Indonesia, fourth largest nation on earth, is smaller than the state of Louisiana. So there's something special about this place. I come from Ohio, where we invented the airplane and sent the man that stepped on the moon, and put the first man that circled the earth, et cetera, et cetera. People had hoped to fly for thousands of years. Americans invented the airplane and the light bulb and the telegraph and the telephone. Every year they write more books, more plays, more symphonies, more copyrights than the rest of the world combined. The internet, the global positioning system, all done by 4% of the people on the planet called Americans. Now, is it because we're smarter than anybody else? Nope. Is it because we work harder than? Nope. It's because we're freer, and the freedom is tied to those three. If you take one leg out, the thing falls apart. And there is a deliberate effort to take the God part out, and we see what happens where that happens. Then the economic part falls apart, so you see Chicago and Detroit and Cleveland. You see where the poverty comes. And so it's essential that if we're going to be free and we're going to invent things and have a higher standard of living, that we know how this works, and that's why you're here. Because look at this. This is an original with me, by the way. I'm going to skip through here until I find a Bible verse. Look at that. The fear of the Lord, now fear is the Old English term for respect, so you fear the king. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. There has to be a starting point, a place. If we're going to build something, it's essential that we all have a 12-inch ruler. If somebody has a 13-inch ruler and somebody else has an 11-inch ruler, this building ain't going to work. So there has to be a starting point, a place. And we believe that there's only two choices. One is what you think is right. If what you think is right, then what I think is right. Then what she thinks is right. That's all over the lot. Or we do what God thinks is right. If we do what God thinks is right, then the whole thing can work. We all have a 12-inch ruler. If we do it what you think is right and what I think is right, and we argue back and forth, and we can just wander around and we don't know where we're going, and the whole thing falls apart. That's called man's condition. Man does that throughout history, throughout the scriptures, when man goes his own way, he ends up in a ditch. And he says, oh, here's the manual. If I do this, I get out and then I prosper. So our founders said, why don't we do it God's way? And God said that if you want to be smart, do it the way he says. Or you can work it out all on your own. And you can learn this at age 15 or 35 or 55 or 75. But eventually you're going to find out that God's way works. He's the one that made us. He made the operations manual. You read it, it works. And so when they said, who do we want to lead us, we want to have three things. What did I say? Fear of the Lord. So we have to have those that fear God. That's got to be the starting point. A guy that doesn't respect God, that means, and we're going to go into it in a minute, everyone worships something. Either they believe their God or they believe that he is God. And that's the whole question. That's the battle that mankind has. And so Adam and Eve, they're in the garden, and God said, I only got one request. That is that you don't eat of that tree. If you do that, we're going to be in trouble because you're going to do it your way and not mine. You say, well, what's so important about the tree? Nothing. What's important about the apple? Nothing. The point is that either you're going to do it my way or his way. Let me explain. You ever heard of the Brinks truck? You ever heard of a armored truck business? Are you familiar? There's armored trucks that transfer money from banks to banks. And the Brinks company is one of those that does that. And so if you get a job at Brinks and they say, here's what I want you to do. In the morning you go to the Federal Reserve and you pick up some fresh new bills and you take them to these 5 banks and you swap out the old bills for the new bills. And that'll be your job, but there's only one request. You cannot break the seal on the money. You understand that? It's not your money, so don't mess with it. And then you decide after about 5 or 6 weeks, I'm not going to kill anybody or anything. I mean, I'm just going to take a little bit. I mean, I'm not going to take 1 million or anything. I'll just take a few. Well, once you decide that you're going to break the seal, once you decide that you're going to do it your way, you can't advance in the company, you can't be trusted, you can't be in charge, because you decided, I'm going to set the rules, not you. And God said, if you do it my way, if you do that way, then we're going to be separated. We're going to have chaos. And so he did. Man was then lost, and he gave us a way to come back. And he said, he made a lamb, he put a lamb on an altar, and he said, if you'll take the innocence of the lamb, I will apply it to you, and you'll be clean again. And so they did that for a few thousand years. Some people say, that's stupid, I'm not going to do that. Fine. You didn't have any forgiveness, so it's up to you. You can do what you want. When the death angel was coming through Egypt, God said, I want you to take the blood of an innocent lamb, a firstborn male, perfect lamb, take the blood, put it on the doorpost and the lintel. And people say, now, that's kind of primitive. I don't want to put blood on my door. That's stupid. And so some people didn't. And when the death angel came, the firstborn male died. But those that did what God said, it passed over them. It passed over them. And so the question is, are we going to do it God's way or man's way? And you and I face that question every day. It's the same question, and that's all God cares about. Are we going to do it his way, or are we going to do it our way? Now, if we do it his way, it prospers. And so, if we want people that are going to do it God's way, men of truth, people that tell the truth. Now, what is truth? This is why you need to go to Christian schools and colleges and be around Christian believers because of truth. And here's truth. I can say this room is 50 feet wide. You can say it's 65, you can say it's 49, and you can say it's 73. Now, we're all happy as punch until somebody comes along and measures it. And when they measure it, that measurement is truth. Everything else is just opinion. But here's the significance of truth. It reveals error. And so I can stand here all day and say it's 50 feet wide. Somebody measured it, find out it's 45. You know that what I said was wrong. So people who are in error hate truth. They hate the presentation of truth. So as long as we're all saying 35 and 49 and 59, everybody's happy until we don't want somebody to measure it, because once they measure it, then we're in trouble. What God says is truth. Everything else is just opinion. So you and I can talk, I can pray in the name of Mother Earth and eagle feathers, and I can do all that, and nobody cares. But if you pray in the name of Jesus Christ, all hell breaks loose. Why? Because God is truth. Christ said, I am the truth. So that's the one they can't tolerate. So you go to any college and they'll have you learn about Islam, and they'll have you learn about memorize all this, but you try reading their quote and scripture, brother, they go haywire. Why? Because error cannot tolerate truth. Let me explain. Let us suppose that you're going to prosecute a guy for stealing an ATM machine. And so you go to court and you're there, and defense counsel gets up to why he's a good boy. Are we having a fire alarm here? We're going to. Is there an international nuclear attack? So And she says he wouldn't think of doing such a thing. He's a good guy, and he was out having dinner with his sister, and here's the receipts and all. And you don't care what she says about what he was doing, because when the time comes, you're going to show a video of him driving his truck up to the ATM machine, putting a chain around it, his face as he leans over the ATM machine, and the truth will overcome the error. Now stick with me here. That's why error cannot tolerate truth. That's why you can't have a conservative professor in a college. That's why you can't speak about conservative. Only liberals, only the left burn books. Only they shout down speakers. Why? Because error cannot tolerate truth. The only way she can survive, she has to prevent you, as the prosecutor, from presenting that information. Why? Because truth overcomes error. That's why you can't. That's why they hate God so much. You're going to take my phone? That's what's doing it? Or you just want... No phones in chapel. Well, all right. Okay, so that's what we do. And then finally, about covetousness. I'm not sure I'm going to have time to talk about this because it is very, very important, but let's wiggle through it as we go. So we've got the standards. Okay, what do our founders... We hold these truths. You got it. Truth. In other words, truth, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator. Who is their Creator? Not a creator. John 1:1, in the beginning, God. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. Now stick with me here, because I heard this for 20 years, never figured it out. But here it is. All things were made by Him. So he called Him the Word. He didn't say what His name was. We're going to figure it out in a minute. All things were made by Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. And the Word became flesh. So who is he talking about? Okay, Jesus, or the Word, or the Creator, they're all synonyms, right? Man is endowed by Jesus Christ. Man is endowed by the Word. Man is endowed by God. Man is endowed by his Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among those are life. Come on, I'm pointing the wrong direction. That's probably the problem. Among those are life. Now, let me just tell you this, that you're going to have people that tell you that I don't want government involved in the bedroom, and this is between a woman and her doctor, and I don't want anybody else involved. Last night, we were at a Right to Life banquet, a crisis pregnancy banquet, and Liz was she took a picture of the folks and said, these folks are helping, and they wrote back, isn't it wonderful to not have government intervene in their decision to take a life if they want to? They're in the wrong country, because there's one country on earth. Remember this 4% that invented all this stuff? There's one country on earth that has, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. The purpose of the United States government, number one, is to preserve innocent life. Number one. That is the purpose of government. So any politician that says to you, well, I'm a county commissioner and it really doesn't have anything to do with me, no, you're in the wrong country, son. If you're going to run for office in America, if you're dog catcher or president, your responsibility, first of all, is to protect innocent life and then liberty. Now you see the sequence, because liberty is a precious little value if you're dead. You have to have life first, then you have to have liberty, then you do sewer systems and overpasses. But anybody that won't respect life, remember this. And the reason we're doing all this 2 weeks before the election is because I want to give you some handles that you have the rest of your life. Any politician that will take innocent life will not hesitate to take your liberty. And he'll tell you what kind of doctor you can go to and how much you're going to pay for it. And we redid our bathrooms, and they're still not finished. And the federal government tells me the size of the toilet bowl in my bathroom. Now, let me just tell you, Alexander Hamilton and George Washington didn't sit down in Philadelphia in order to establish a government to tell me what size toilet bowl I should have. These people that dream out ways to tell us what to do, they will take away our individual liberty. Tell us even what kind of light bulbs I can buy. Okay, so there's the purpose of government. Now, here's the way it breaks down, so that you can listen to a politician for 90 seconds, and you can tell where he stands, because there's only two worldviews. You can listen to a professor, and when you marry somebody, this is biggie, there's only two worldviews, and you choose a spouse of a different worldview, you're going to have trouble. That is all there is to it. That is, either you believe that man created God, man got here on his own, climbed up out of the primordial slime and said, let's write a symphony. Brother, we did it all by ourselves. Man, and then he said, we needed something to worship, so he created God. or you believe that God created man. Now, that is the difference of every battle, and that's where America took its decision as to where our rights come, because we believe that God did it. So, if you believe that man created God, then you believe that man is his own standard. If you believe that God created, you believe God has a standard. If you believe man is his own standard, you believe man is basically good. You listen to a politician, they say about man being good, then you know which side of he's on. And why is he good? Because he's got his own standard. He decides what's good. And so that's where tyranny comes from. Well, it's coming in a minute. Then if he does anything wrong, it's not his fault. It's society's fault. And so he never holds the individual accountable for what he does because he's a good guy. So if somebody comes in here and starts shooting people, it can't be his fault. He's good. So whose fault is it? Well, it's got to be that gun's fault. That gun coming here doing a bad thing. They need to regulate that gun. Can't anybody see that? Anybody with two brains will understand that they ought to regulate that gun. Coming in. You know, if guns kill people, how does anyone ever get out of a gun show alive? That's what I want to know. And then finally, and this is important, without God, where do rights come from? They come from the group. And you listen to liberals, they always talk about women's rights, gay rights, African American rights, whatever. There are no blonde, left-handed rights. There's only rights that come from God and they apply to everyone. But if you don't have God, then they apply to the group and you're in trouble. Because every person in this room is a minority. And when that turns against you, then you're in trouble, and that's called tyranny. And America didn't do that. Why? Because it believed in God. It protected life. It created people equal, such that, I always ask the question, there's 1.3 billion Chinese. Are you going to tell me there's not one Thomas Edison in all of that? Of course there are. There's lots of them. But there's no freedom for them to succeed. And so that's where it goes. Final observation, and then let's see if we can come up with a couple of questions. I want to leave this thought with you, and that is, anybody can tell me what that picture is? You sound like Mass. Everybody's saying, "Hail Mary, Mother." Hail Mary, Mother, God bless her, and bless her. Okay, somebody tell me. Put your hand up. What is it? Washington crossing the Delaware. Now, let me tell you anybody tell me when it is? When was it? Anybody tell me? It was Christmas Day, December 25th, 1776. George Washington, they had started out the summer with tens of thousands of soldiers. They signed the Declaration in July. They'd already started in April. People volunteered. They're going to take a free country, done something that nobody had ever done before. People had written about it for a couple hundred years, but never in history had people, just because God made them, not because of their bloodline or property they owned or anything, just because they were in the sight of God, they were all equal, and they had capacity to make decisions for themselves to run their own government. It was a noble, noble idea, and people were all fired up and excited about it, and they took off against the strongest military power in the world, who set about to smash them. As a little aside, under our current president, our Navy has less than 200 soldiers, less than 200 ships at the moment. The blockade of the United States by the British in 1776 had over 600 ships. So these guys right here are going to take on the strongest military in the world, and it doesn't go real well. And so they get beat over and over and over, and some of them get sick and leave, and others just abandon them. And now it's December 23rd, and on December 23rd, it's 2 days, the people are hanging around. What do I do with my iPad, Lizzie? Did you, can you bring it to me for a second, if you see it? So it's December 23rd, and the head of the American Bible Society, Benjamin Rush, comes down, and he says to George Washington, he was his prayer partner, he said, if we don't have a victory, we're out of business. Because on January 1st is when all their enlistments are up, and these guys are only hanging around. There's 7,500 of them, of which only 2,500 of them could stand and march. Thanks, sweetheart. That only 2,500 of them could stand and march. And if we don't have a victory, this thing is over. He wrote a letter to his cousin who was running his farm at Mount Vernon. He said, I fear this thing is about up. And so, on December 23rd, a fellow by the name of Thomas Paine wrote an article in which he said this, and I'm all finished. I hope I have stimulated a question or two that we can respond to. He wrote this. He said, these are the times. Now get this. He's trying to do something nobody's ever done before. He hasn't had a single victory. If he doesn't have a victory, it's all up. And so let's think about the election right now and where we are. Paine said, these are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will in this crisis shrink from the service of his country. But he that stands by it now deserves love and thanks of all men and women. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheaply, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives something its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price upon its goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom would not be highly rated. George Washington read that. On December 24th, he had, how many of you can stand? He had 2,400 of them could stand up. And he had it read to them. And then his prayer partner asked God's blessing, and he said the theme, the password would be victory or death, because it's all over. In less than a week, this is all over. And then George Washington said this. I'm going to pause because I want you to hear it. George Washington looked at these people. They all had American birth certificates. They all had American uniforms. And George Washington looked at them and said this. Post none but Americans on guard tonight. What do you mean? See, being an American is not physical. Being an American is spiritual. And I don't care how many passports or birth certificates you got, that doesn't make you an American. I don't care, you can be fighting in Washington's army. You're still not American unless you believe the principles that made America what it was. Number one, that God is our source. He gave us life. He's the source of our liberty. If we honor him, he will bless us. And in so doing, every life is protected and supreme. That is unique to America. We do it God's way, we prosper. We abandon God's way, we fail. If one country is on one side of a river is prospering, a country on the other side of the river is failing, there's a reason. And this is the reason America is the place that it is. It's a spiritual battle in which we are engaged. Let me repeat. It is a spiritual battle in which we are engaged. So of those three legs, we cannot have economic freedom. We can't become wealthy unless we have liberty. We can't have liberty unless we have a spiritual value system. And we don't have a spiritual value system unless men and women like you do what's right for our country in the years ahead. So with that, God bless. Questions? I put everybody to sleep. You better ask one or I'll start preaching again. Yes, sir. The nation was founded beginning with prayer. And, okay. Me as a person, have I ever been a liberal, in other words? Is that what you're asking? Yep. It's what churches used to do. It's only been the last 20 years that Satan has been very sophisticated in saying to politicians, you don't want to speak about religious things. So we don't want to have prayer in our city council. It needs to be separate. And then he got the preachers to say, well, you don't want to talk about taking innocent life and the undermining. And the taking of innocent life is so fundamental that you can't overstress it. If you only want to know one thing about who to vote for, that's because from that everything else flows. If I can take innocent life, I can take anything else. And so when the pulpits began to say, well, I don't want to get involved with that, that's political. And so therefore you have the churches running around. I'm a member of an organization called United in Purpose. George Barna does surveys on a weekly basis all the time. 90-some% of the American people, church-going believers, want the church to preach on marriage. Why is it that we are opposed to 3 women marrying 2 men? What does that do to the culture? Because we have a biblically based culture. Over 80% of all the pulpits of the pastors that are interviewed said they never talk about that. So you've got the people want to know. They go to the church to find out. The church doesn't tell them. Why? Because of that principle, that we're going to leave the politics here, and we're going to leave the Bible here, and we're going to leave economics over here, and nobody understands that anyway, and so we're wandering around. The truth of the matter is it's all seamlessly involved, and churches used to talk. Every church always had an election sermon that went through what they were. And then and David Barton has all these sermons on abortion and on all these things that were from the 1800s. I mean, we always talked about life. And so God is a part of our every being. You can't have your marriage separate from your biblical understanding. All of this is intertwined. And our founders made it all one. That's why we never could have a meeting without calling upon God in prayer. And then lest people forget, you can't have an official document unless you put done in this the year of our Lord. What's the point of that? You had to declare a Groundhog Day. Because our founders wanted to say, you understand, there's a starting point here. You go back to that. And then you can't take a position of public trust unless you swear allegiance to what? On what you think is right? Nope. Go swear allegiance on the Bible. What God thinks is right. And from that, this little place, 4% of the population of the world, created more wealth than in all recorded history and all of mankind. Now we're stumbling around. We've flatlined for the last 10 years. People can't create jobs, all the rest. People walk around doing what's convenient for them, saying stupid things. Why? Because we no longer, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So you abandon God. Let me just give you a quick example. Anybody ever remember the story about the emperor with no clothes? Have you ever heard of that? For those of you that haven't, it was a poem that was written by Hans Christian Andersen in the 1800s. And he told about that this king, emperor, always was complaining about he wanted a regal attire, and it was never satisfied. And so these two tailors got together, and they said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to tell him that this is really, really dynamic. But you only see this outfit if you're smart. And if you can't see it, then that means you're stupid. And of course, then he'll follow along. And so we'll do that. And so he came and said, oh, sire, this is a marvelous outfit. And if you're a deplorable, you won't be able to see it. But if you're really, really smart, if you're really bright, you'll be able to see it. And so the king went to his court. What do you think? And what did everybody in the court say? Oh, sire, that looks wonderful. That looks wonderful. And so sure enough, he's marching in a parade. And a little boy says, why is the emperor walking in his underwear? And everybody, they weren't supposed to say that. Now, that is called the poem of the emperor with no clothes. And it's a part of American culture, part of Western culture, and we would all refer to it. And nobody has ever heard it, but what? They didn't laugh. You think that's too stupid for words. Nobody would do that. Nobody. That's idiotic. Hang on. There was a program when I was young. Art Linkletter had a program in the afternoon on television called Kids Say the Darndest Things. And he would interview these 4- and 5-year-old kids who would tell things on their parents, and they were just hilarious. You can punch them up on YouTube sometime. It's just fun. A little 5-year-old girl couldn't be that funny, but you're rolling on the floor with the stuff that they say. Well, about 3 months ago, a fellow from Washington University in Washington State, and he's now on YouTube, so this weekend, when you go around, you can punch it up on YouTube. College kids say the darndest things, in which he individually took kids that are coming out of the class, took them separately, so there's nobody else around, one-on-one, and he interviewed about 8 of them, and all of them gave the same answer. He walks up to this woman and said, if I feel that I'm a woman, can I be a woman? Every one of them said, yes, I can be a woman. He said, well, if I want to be a Chinese woman, can I be a Chinese woman? Every one of them said yes. He's 5'9", so he says, I've always wanted to be 6'5". So can I be a 6'5" Chinese woman? Every last one of these capable, intelligent, 20-something American kids in 2016 said yes. These are the same brains that 40 years ago stormed the beaches of Normandy and freed this country. These folks can't even tell a 5'9" white male from a 6'5" Chinese female. Why? Because this is what happens when man forgets God. There's no frame of reference or right or wrong, so you have to do what the emperor says or what the power group says or what the group or what the teachers are saying or what the crowd is saying, and you've abandoned God as your reference point. You've made the ruler 15 inches, so the whole thing doesn't work. And has it happened before? It happens over and over and over. It happened to the Peloponnesians. It happens to the Greeks. It happened in Romans, the first chapter, the 22nd verse. It says, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. That's what man does without God. And it's in the heart of every person to say, I want to do it my way. I don't know, my parents make me go to a Christian school. They make all this stuff is so important. It doesn't matter to me. Will you wait till I'm an adult? I'm going to do it my way. When you do it my way, you end up in the ditch. It's only been that way throughout all recorded history. A nation that follows God prospers. A marriage that honors God is successful. A person that chooses him as his leader achieves what God intended him to be, which is unlike anyone else ever in the history of man. God's plan for your life is life. He wants you to prosper. He wants your marriage to prosper. He wants your business to prosper. He wants your future to prosper. Understand this. Satan's plan for your life is death. He wants you morally dead. He wants you spiritually dead. He wants you financially dead. And he wants you physically dead. All thoughts of suicide come from him. So our founders and God are on the side of life, and that's the battle. With this I close. When you separate from God, there's a term for that. It's called sin. Sin is anything that separates us from God. And let me tell you what sin does. Sin, when it is conceived, bringeth forth death. The wages of sin is death. There is a way that seems right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. What are the ways of death? Abortion, infanticide, euthanasia, right to die legislation, drug addiction, alcoholism, death, death, death. But I am come that ye might have life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. He that hath the Son hath life. And so this is a life and death struggle that's taking place in Washington, taking place here, and takes place in our hearts. And we will choose either life or death, Christ or our own way. And history and examples and scriptures tell us that God's way is best. God bless you. See ya.